online.
Okay, hey everybody. So I lied a little bit last time. I said that we were going to talk about English in a couple videos. We're going to go ahead and talk about English for oral presentations right now. It's really important when you prepare an oral presentation in English to practice the English that you're going to use and to know what kind of language do native English speakers use when they give an oral presentation. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a really good toolbox, a bunch of phrases, a bunch of English language phrases that we use commonly in oral presentations. So that's what the topic is today, and I hope that you can use some of these in the future. We're going to talk about some standard English presentation phrases, some of which it's really important to know that sometimes the language that we use in presentations isn't natural English or isn't English that I would use every day, which is why it's really important to practice the specific English that is used for this specific purpose. And again, the last step of preparing the presentations, if you remember from the 6 steps of preparing a presentation, that last step is practice. Practice, 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 practice again, practice again, practice again. I cannot stress how important practicing is when you're doing a presentation. I am a teacher. I have taught a lot of classes where my students have given oral presentations, and I promise you, if you do not practice, your teacher knows. So make sure you're practicing. And a few tips for practicing. Practice with an audience. That means, yes, you should practice on your own. Yes, you should practice in your room. But then practice in front of a friend. Give your presentation to a friend or to a parent. But give it to an audience. That way you can get some feedback and you can know what it's like to give a presentation. This is true for any kind of skill. I play piano, and I once had to play at an event. And before I was going to play at the event, I played the song that I was going to play in front of my parents, and I totally forgot everything. I was playing, and I just totally, my mind went blank, and I couldn't continue. That's why practice is important, because it shows you what your weaknesses are, it shows you where the problems are, and then you go back and fix them. If I had forgotten at the actual event, that would have been a very bad thing. That would have been very embarrassing for me. So I'm really glad that I practiced. So practice with an audience. Next, practice out loud. A lot of people, when they practice their speech, they look at their outline and they do this. That will help you to an extent. But if you're actually practicing out loud, you're actually saying the things that you're going to be saying in presentation. You're actually doing the presentation like you will do it in real time. That's going to help you so much more. To have that language actually stored in your body, stored in your voice, will really help you. So practice out loud, talk. Even if you're talking to yourself, talk out loud. And then last, practice with and without an outline. Again, I think I've said this before, you don't need to write a script. Scripts will not help you. Scripts will make you nervous. Instead, write an outline that kind of guides you through the presentation. And try to practice with your outline, and then try to practice without your outline. Can you do it both ways? That will help you kind of reaffirm the information that you have to practice that information, but will also make it so that you're not dependent on the outline. But the point is that you should be practicing a lot and practicing with the English phrases that I'm going to give you now. So let's talk about some of the English phrases. First, English phrases that we use to introduce our topic and the purpose of our presentation. So this is in the introduction, right? So today I'm here to talk to you about English phrases for presentation. That's one example. I'm happy to have this opportunity to discuss some of the English phrases that you can use in a presentation. Presenting you with my topic. I'd like to present briefly about English phrases used in a presentation. The purpose of this presentation is so that you have a list of English phrases to use in your presentations in the future. My objective today is to give you English phrases to use in future presentations. So I wanted to give you these. So this is just an example of how all of the phrases that I'm giving you today are really helpful, and all you have to do is take your specific information, take your topic, take your purpose, and plug them into these phrases. You do not need to change them. I wrote these by myself. I give you permission to use them, to steal them, put them in your presentation, memorize them. You do not need to use every single phrase that I'm going to give you today. You can choose one and use that for every presentation. That's okay. But what I'm telling you is that if you use these phrases in your presentation, your English will be good, your presentation will be good, and you will sound it will just sound like a much more professional, much more prepared presentation. So go ahead, write these down, pause the video, save them, choose one that you like, and use it in your future presentations. I promise it will help you. So these are the sentences, the phrases that will be used to introduce our topic in the introduction. So remember, the introduction includes a hook, and I introduce myself, and then I introduce my topic and my purpose. After that, I go into a roadmap. Again, your roadmap is, what are my main points? What am I going to talk to you about? The roadmap is really important. A lot of people forget it, but my roadmap tells my audience what they are going to hear briefly, tells them what the main points are. This is important because it tells your audience, it gives your audience a map, right? It lets your audience know what they will hear so they can prepare to hear it. That will help them listen and help them access the information, help them keep the information much better. So a roadmap sounds like this. My presentation is divided into 3 parts, or my presentation is divided into 2 parts, 4 parts, however many main ideas you have. I'll start with some of the tips for writing a good presentation. I will start with information about how to gather material. I will start with the kinds of organizational patterns that there are. First, I will talk about how to gather material. First, I will talk about tips for practicing. First, I will talk about, right, this is leading into, or this is you presenting what your first main point will be, which is related back to the organizational structure from last time. Next, I will look at some examples of organizational structures and how they affect the speech. Then I want to turn to some English phrases that can be helpful for your presentations, right? So this is the next point. Finally, we will discuss some examples of organizational structures and how they affect the speech. Last, I will consider how organizational structures affect the speech by giving you some examples, right? So again, I'm just starting with exactly these words, and I'm plugging in my specific information into this. And it really works. So I'm going to let you go ahead and look at these. Choose the ones that you like. Again, a roadmap is really important. So if I'm giving you a presentation about myself, I need to start with an introduction to my topic, right? So today, I want to tell you a little bit of information about myself. I just want to give you an introduction for myself. I will start with information about my family. Next, I will look at my life in Thailand a little bit. And finally, we will discuss my goals for the future. So that is an example of a roadmap to a self-introduction for me. So you can use these as your roadmap. And again, your roadmap is really important before you go into the first main point. Then when you do go into the first main point, again, you use a transition. These transitions are important. So let me start with talking about my family, right? Because that's my first main point. Or I'd like to begin by explaining a little bit about how I grew up, by explaining what my life was like before moving to Thailand. Let's go ahead and begin talking about my life in America. Right? So this is, again, we're sticking with a self-introduction for me. We're doing this chronologically. I'm starting in the past. I'm then going to my life in Thailand today. And then I'm thinking about the future. So that's a chronological organization. My first main point is my family. My first main point is my life in America, right? So I just take that first main point and I plug it in here. I stick this sentence before my presentation about my first main point. That's all you need. But the transitions are really important because they're leading your audience from one part of the speech or one part of the presentation to the next part of the presentation. This sentence really effectively leads your audience from your introduction into your first main point, and it will prepare your audience to hear whatever your first main point is. Okay, I'm finished with my first main point, and I want to move on to my next main point. I just talked about my life in America. Now I want to move on to talking about my life in Thailand. So I'd like to move on to the next point. That's an easy one. I didn't even need to say it. I could say I'd like to move on to the next point. My life in Thailand has been great, right? Or I'd like to move on to the next point, which is about my life in Thailand. This leads me to my second point, or my third point about my life in Thailand. So again, I'm going on to the next point, or my final point, if I'm moving on to the last point. This leads me to my final point about my goals for the future. What are they? Let's turn now to talking about my life in Thailand. Or let's turn now to thinking about my goals for the future. This is not something we say usually in conversational English, but this is a really strong presentation phrase. Let's turn now to. That means I'm just changing my topic. I'm changing my main point. I'm moving on to the next section. Let's turn now to. Take that phrase, write it down, use it in your next presentation. Okay, let's look at presentations for presenting examples. Obviously, we have for example, followed by whatever the example is. A good example of this is, or we can see this from, and then give the example. So for example, I'm talking, for example, right now, I'm giving you an example of an example. For example, I'm giving you a presentation about homework in schools. And my main point is that we shouldn't be giving students homework, or we should be giving students less homework. And a good example of this is Finland. Or we can see this from Finland, who doesn't give homework to children of a certain age. And they have a really strong education system, right? So that's an example of how to present an example in a speech about homework. Okay, let's link. So sometimes we want to link back to information that I've already said. This relates back to what I mentioned at the beginning about how more schooling doesn't necessarily mean better results. This ties in with what I said earlier about how more schooling doesn't necessarily give you better results, right? As you may remember from what I said before, more schooling doesn't necessarily give better results. So this is how I'm tying information that I'm presenting now, or an example that I presented now, back to information that I gave you in the first main point, or in the introduction. This helps you connect all of the parts of the presentation together, which gives you a really strong presentation. Sometimes we want to be citing sources. We found this information in an article on the internet, and we want to say where we did that. We do this by saying according to. So according to the Washington Post, according to an article in the Washington Post, according to a specific author, as a person said in an article, right? As Julia Ponath said in her Washington Post article, right? So I'm just choosing, I'm writing the name of the author and then the source, or the article that I found it in, the book, the website that I found it in, based on the data presented by the Washington Post research, or based on the data presented by this article, based on the data presented by an author, Julia Ponath. This is how we then make sure that our audience, it makes our audience believe us. I have a source, I have a person, I have an article. It's not just me, it's not just things that I'm saying, but it's things that other people have done research on. So I cite my sources to give myself credibility. It makes me believable. Okay, and then the last one, the conclusion. So I've come to the end of my presentation, and I'd like to conclude by asking you a question. I'd like to conclude by giving you something to think about. I'd like to conclude by, how do you want to end your presentation? In conclusion, let me sum up some of my main ideas. And then you do it. In conclusion, let me sum up some of my main ideas. Practice is important. And when you practice, make sure that you are practicing out loud, and that you're using the English phrases that I've given you today. That brings me to the end of my presentation. This is actually really convenient, really appropriate, because this does bring me to the end of my presentation. And in conclusion, I want to sum up some of the main ideas. Oh, thank you for your attention. This is, if you want to end a presentation saying thank you for your attention, we'll make people clap for you and we'll end your presentation immediately. So again, take some of these phrases, write them down. Okay, so what I've given you today is a great toolbox. Go back, watch this video, write down some of the phrases that you like. There's also so many resources on the internet that will give you even more phrases that will help you with giving your presentations. Use them, memorize them, practice them until they're really natural. It's really important that you practice. It's really important that you practice in English out loud, and it's really important practicing using the language that we'll use in a presentation. It'll be hard at first, but as you do it more and more, it'll get easier, I promise, until it just feels like second nature. It's really natural. So take some of these phrases, put them in your next presentation, and I will see you next time.